Thank you for listening today on Revealing Wholeness, sponsored by Infinity Whole Health. Check out our website at infinityWholeHealth.com, where we are revealing the eternal in each individual, the infinite in the individual. The creativity is made manifest. Limitation is let go. Now, here's your host, Dr. Troy Munson.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Troy Munson on Revealing Wholeness. Today I want to talk about protein. I want to talk about ketogenic diet a little bit more, and I want to really unpack the China study. And so some of you have read the book long ago called The China Study, and it talked about this idea that protein causes cancer and that vegetarian diet was really a possible diet that might be incredibly healthy. And I'm not here necessarily to debate that, but I want to talk about the protein issues, because the whole thing started when China, they had this malnutrition problem. And so as the U.S., we really produce peanuts like no tomorrow. And what happened is we said, well, why don't we give you peanuts for protein to the impoverished areas of China to help them with their malnutrition issues? Because the affluent areas of China where they could afford protein, like in the form of meat, fish, things like that, they seem to have no issues with malnutrition. And so that when they started giving peanuts to all these poor indigent areas of China, they noticed something, because they had an emperor that died of cancer or got cancer or something, and he basically unleashed the entire medical field to start tracking and following all regions, all towns, cause of death and disease, and trying to figure out, could they link anything by figuring out what people ate, the areas they lived at, were they cleaner, were they worse, what was the incidence of death, all this stuff. And when they started figuring it out, they started realizing that the affluent areas had a higher cancer rate. And what happened when they started giving all these peanuts to the poorer areas, their cancer rates begin matching the affluent areas that could afford a lot of protein. And so they started trying to figure out the link between protein and cancer. And what they did in the study, in the China study, they also took rats and they fed them a high protein diet, 20% protein. And when they did that, the rats got cancer. And when they reduced the protein intake to 5% of their diet, the cancer in the rats went away. They'd go back up to 20% protein and the cancer would come back in the same rat. And then they would reduce the protein back to 5%, and the cancer would go away again in the same rat. They literally could create cancer and take it away in the same rat. Now the problem is that by the end of the book, he said, you know what? There are way too many variables to say that we are advocating a vegetarian diet and that we're saying that protein causes cancer. That is not what we're saying. We're just saying that we have found some data that we cannot explain at this point, and we have to take a better look at it. And so just for FYI, for protein diets or high protein diets and carbohydrate diets, this is a research that came out in 2002 by Sharman and Kramer in the Journal of Nutrition, and it talks about they took 12 men, median age 36 years of age, who switched from a diet of protein, carbohydrate, and fat, and it was 17% protein diet, 47% carbohydrate diet, and 32% fat diet. They took them from that diet to a 30% protein diet, 8% carbohydrates, very low carbohydrates, that ketogenic type diet, and they upped the fats to 61%. You think 61% fat, they must be fat. And so when they did blood tests, after, looks like, I would say, it's not telling me here on this, but they took fasting blood work on these folks, and they noticed a 33% reduction in triglycerides. Triglycerides are sugars and what they're turning to in the blood. And so the higher your triglycerides, the more sugar and the more carbs you're eating. So I'll see people with high triglycerides frequently, and that's actually heart problems. And I've talked about that in other heart podcasts. Your triglycerides are the most important number to look at on your lipid panel. I'm not so concerned about the cholesterol and HDLs and LDLs. But that being said, they had a 29% reduction in postprandial lipidemia, meaning after a fat meal, they had 29% less fat in their blood than a normal high-carb fat meal. And they had 34% reduction in fasting insulin levels. So now their blood sugar was way, way better. And then they had an 11.5% increase in HDLs. So here we have the good, technically the good fats, they call them HDLs, and they had all this fat in their diet, and yet HDLs went up. And so it did the exact opposite of what most doctors tell us and what most people think happens when I eat a high-fat diet. And so I want you to realize that we're talking about protein here, but a ketogenic diet is a lot more than just protein. You're going to increase fats, you're going to decrease carbs, you're going to decrease the need for a lot of other nutrients that get sucked away by that carb diet. But I still want you to realize that those proteins, if they are denatured in like roasted nuts and things, and you're overcooking proteins like frying an egg on high, those are things that can be certainly damaging to the body when it comes to a high protein diet. Royal Lee started talking about proteins and denaturing of proteins. He said roasted nuts were the worst thing you could do for anybody because that's a denatured protein and it ends up creating almost like a pellagra, which is a B vitamin lack, which causes vascular issues and all kinds of stuff going on in the human body. And those denatured proteins would clog everything, and they would end up making sludge everywhere, and now cells couldn't clean up, and now they would start to degenerate and now start to form these, if you will, issues. And so we're seeing that with these peanuts that we would give to China, and now we see cancer rise, and we say, oh my gosh, it's got to be protein. We should all be vegetarians. And that's not it at all. If you overcook protein, it really is quite harmful to the human body in that way. It tends to become a carcinogen. And so this is a bummer to me because I've done a lot of research on this and I love roasted peanuts. So in my house, we do a lot of fermented nuts. We ferment walnuts and almonds. And to ferment nuts, all you do is put them in water, submerge them, and put some sea salt in it. And after 24 hours, they swell up with the sea salt and denature the phytic acids that are in the nuts that keep, other pests from eating them so they can make it to the ground and make a new tree. That's why they're produced in the nut in the first place. But as humans, we can get through the phytic acids, but they're really not that great for us. So a fermented nut is much easier on our digestive system, and most people that I come in contact with have poor digestion to begin with. And so as we take those nuts and soak them with salt, we denature the phytic acids. Now you dry them at low temperatures, about 115 degrees. It takes about 24 hours, maybe 36 hours for almonds to dry them back crispy, and now they're easy to chew. They taste different. Walnuts are no longer bitter. I love walnuts that are fermented. And so we have these nuts that are actually quite beneficial to us. So if you're going to eat a lot of nuts and seeds and things like that, I do recommend that you do some form of fermentation on them. But the last thing I want to mention is that when we denature proteins, what does it do to the human body? Well, a dude named Pottinger had cats. And he took the cats and he fed them a completely processed, refined diet. And by the third generation of cats getting this processed food, they were actually infertile. And they could not have kittens. And so when that happened, he switched the diet of that generation, that third generation, to a completely raw diet. They would catch mice and whatever and all that. But the interesting thing is these cats that couldn't have kittens were also, their teeth were basically rotting out of their head. And, you look around and how many people have cavities? How many people have rotten teeth? How many people are on drugs and they barely have any teeth to hold onto their dentures, and their bridges and things. And so we watch from the inside out, people are really being destroyed. And it's really easy to see in teeth. That's why when we see white teeth, it's attractive to us because that means that person has good nutrition and a solid diet. And that means they're likely going to be a good companion or mate and have good kids. I know it sounds kind of weird and it's kind of primal, but that's in essence what white, nice teeth tell us. And so Pottinger, it took 4 generations of cats, if I remember right, before the kittens were healthy and their teeth were healthy and they weren't sickly anymore. It took that many generations when you destroyed the health of an individual to get it back. So it kind of tells us something that even genetically, as we eat poorer and poorer foods, we're having an impact on our children. and our children's children, which is really, really fascinating. And so as humans, I think we have possibly a higher level of consciousness, and maybe we can heal a generation faster. But everybody's kind of heard the news that this new generation coming up will not outlive their parents. They will die before their parents do because they're so unhealthy. And so this is kind of the legacy as Americans of eating high-carb diets, not having good proteins, overcooking things, being germophobic and washing everything and freaking out, and vaccines and all the crazy things that go along with that mental thinking of how weak we possibly are. And really, it's mostly a lie. If our bodies were that weak, nobody would be here today. We wouldn't be having this conversation. You wouldn't be listening to me. Our bodies are quite potent and quite strong if treated well and taken care of. The stronger your system is, the more you resist everything. And so I know this is kind of a shotgun approach at protein and vegetarianism, and I'm not advocating vegetarianism. I think there's people out there that can do that, and we may get into at some point like blood type diets where those that may have the ability to produce proteins better than others, but most people are fairly protein deficient, and I come in contact with that very frequently in practice. But until next time, I hope this kind of gives you a little bit more understanding. And I'm Dr. Troy Munson on Revealing Wholeness.
This concludes another episode of Revealing Wholeness with Dr. Troy Munson. If you have any questions concerning this podcast or others, you can reach Dr. Munson by email at chiroman, that's CHIRO-man, at dr.com. Or you can call him at his office during office operation hours at 360-893-8586. This show is sponsored by Infinity Whole Health on the Disruptors Podcast Network.